Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons 5th Edition, and I'm going to specifically talk about how the Latte Apocalypse, the 2020 March just debacle that descended on everyone, slapped masks on every human's face on the planet, erased their smile, erased their identity, right? And how the Latte Apocalypse has proven even more that Session Zero and open communication are shockingly, ridiculously bad ideas for how to run a Dungeons and Dragons game, and how this idea of open communication and talk to your players and don't be a doc. The doc, replace the O with a different letter. I'm not going to say that, but that's what people say constantly later. So there's this absolute tsunami of Dungeons and Dragons commentary that says Session Zero is open communication and it's great. Open communication is great. Don't be a doc. Talk to your players. It's all the same thing. And actually, one thing that I'm glad of is this nonsense is spouted so often, right, that there are commentators that are now realizing it's all they say and are actually acknowledging. Ginny D does it. I think it's Sam Joshua. I think I was just listening to another person. They were like, well, yeah, don't be a doc, talk to your player. I guess that's what I'm saying again, right? And so one good thing is we've reached a point where a lot of commentators are realizing they're just constantly repeating this bad advice. They don't know it's bad advice. But what I'm saying today is that the Latte Apocalypse has brought shockingly new, very profound evidence that open communication is a bad model to base your Dungeons and Dragons game on, right? So let's jump into it. All right. So it's a constant refrain, and I want to be one of the knights that slays this dragon. I'm just so against open communication and Session Zero and don't be a doc, and I just think it's just horrible advice. So I'm going to give you an example of why. Okay, so let's look at a traditional Dungeons and Dragons game. Okay, we're going to use four fictional players and one fictional dungeon master. Okay, so April is the dungeon master, Beth is one of the players, Catherine is one of the players, Deborah is one of the players, and Edith is one of the players. A, B, C, D, E, right? A as the dungeon master, B, C, D, E as the players, okay? All right, so April says, hey, I want to play Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, and I'm inviting you for, right? And then she goes with the now traditional Session Zero. And by the way, I do think traditional is common and standard, right? So in the old days, you're right. Tradition needed 100 years or a century. Now you just need 3 years for tradition, because in this world where things turn upside down on a weekly basis, 3 years is enough for a tradition, right? And actually, this tired, ridiculous, horrible advice of Session Zero, which is absolutely constant, you will find on the majority of D&D commentators, it's traditional, right? So I run a non-traditional game, a non-traditional, unique, innovative, cool, fun game that doesn't use Session Zero, right? And if you're running Session Zero, which came out 7 years, it came into Dungeons and Dragons officially 7 years after it came out, right? You're the traditional one, right? So traditional is common and standard today, right? Yeah. So for instance, I have a Leave It to Beaver marriage, right? We had, it was very Ward Cleaver and Joan Cleaver, June Cleaver, and that is a non-traditional marriage today because almost nobody's doing it now, right? Yeah. So so there was a question in the comments. I'm answering it, right? Traditional now just means common and standard, in my opinion. And definitions change, right? If the word, right? Used to mean something really different. Now it means something, drastically, different than what it did before, right? words change, right? Tradition is now, it just means common and standard, right? So session 0 is the traditional game now, right? So basically, April starts up her game, and she says, we're going to do a traditional game. We're going to do session 0, right? And so the idea is that they're going to talk openly about the game, and then they'll come to an understanding, and they will craft their game through open communication, right? And I'm crying BS. And I'm going to show you player by player how this is complete and utter BS, right? All right, so the reason why open communication and session 0 are just horrible monster ideas that do not produce good games, right, is that open communication doesn't actually happen. And here's why. The vast majority of people have hidden motivations. And those motivations are hidden by them from other players and dungeon masters, or they are literally hidden to themselves. Like the person has a motivation that is hidden to the person themselves, right? So let's go through it. Let's talk about the hidden motivations of the players, of April, Beth, Catherine, Deborah, and Edith. Okay, April is the dungeon master, okay? April went to 2 years of 4-year college, dropped out. She's a genius, right? But she dropped out because of social reasons. By the way, this happens a lot today. There are a lot of super smart people who drop out of college for reasons that have nothing to do with academics or intelligence, but have more to do with like emotional intelligence, right? And stability and social stability, right? There's one person I know specifically, right, who's like, should have 3 degrees and has 0 degrees because the person could not handle the social aspects of college, right? So this happens, right? So she goes to 2 years of college and then drops out, right? And now she works at a fast food restaurant, right? She could be, making 6 figures, right? And, running a startup, but because she couldn't handle the social aspects of college, she works at a fast food restaurant, right? But she's literally a genius, right? And that's one of the reasons why. And so now April runs this Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game because she wants power, right? She wants one world where she can control everything, right? When she's at work and she makes the sandwich wrong, she has to throw it in the trash, and she gets a bunch of, a ration of crap from her boss, and, and has to hear, somebody being berated at the, counter up front, whatever. And, she lives in this suck world, but in the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game, as a dungeon master, she rules everything, right? I can tell you, there are a lot of, the DM seat is a deity seat, right? You control weather, you control every non-player character, you can kill a player character whenever you want. There's a lot of power in the dungeon master, right? So April, her true motivation, which is hidden to herself, is simply to exert power, because in her own world she cannot exert power, okay? Now, when you get into the game, she's going to talk a bunch of nonsense and talk about, backstories and all this. She don't really care about any of it. She just cares about having a world she can control, right? But she's never going to openly say that, not even to herself, right? And so, fundamentally, from the start, the Dungeon Master has a hidden motivation that actually blocks real open communication. And she's actually doing very closed, narrow communication. And a lot of what she's saying is performative, right? Let's go to Beth, okay? Beth is there for proximity. She only cares about one thing. She wants to be near Deborah for 4 hours. She wants to sit next to Deborah for 4 hours because that gives benefits, right? One, it gives access to Deborah, right? And basically Beth just really likes spending time with Deborah, right? And she could care less about Dungeons & Dragons, but what she cares passionately about is just sitting next to Deborah for 4 hours, sitting in the proximity of Deborah, right? And, there's certain things that she wants, conversation, or, X number of other things that she wants from Deborah, and the proximity of sitting for 4 hours, right? Or, because it's a traditional game, right? 4 hours, right? She just wants 4 hours next to Deborah. But she is never going to say that, right? That is her hidden motivation. She knows it, right? But nobody else at the table, somebody else, like probably Beth, Catherine probably suspects it, right? Like, but it doesn't hurt Catherine, so she's not gonna, she's not gonna call out Beth on that, right? But it's the main motivation, right? But it's never going to come out in the session 0, right? Because of this hidden motivation, right? So Catherine, let's talk about Catherine. Catherine is there for players, okay? Now, so Catherine is there for players, and the reason why is Catherine's super smart, right? She knows that the vast majority. Catherine actually wants to dungeon master. Actually, she wants to game master. Catherine has found this new game, index card RPG, which runs faster and has better art and better rules design than Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. And she wants to run an index card RPG She wants to run an index card RPG campaign, right? But she's not super. She doesn't really attract players really well, right? She wants to do this, but she hasn't been able to build her own group, right? So what she's saying is, oh, you know what? I think that April's game is going to crap out, and I'm going to be here to pick up the players, not the pieces, the players, right? And if I can get Deborah, I'll bet, right? Deborah, I don't know what it is, but Beth always plays in every game Deborah plays in. So if I could just get Deborah, one player, that'll give me 2 players, right? And then we could scrape up a third, and then I got my my index card RPG game running, right? So I'm not here really to play this game. I'm here because I think April's going to cock this 6 ways to sideways, 6 ways to Sunday, and that this whole thing will fall apart 3 to 6 months from now. And guess what? Catherine is 100% right, right? We already know this. Wizards of the Coast said the vast majority, like well over 75% of all D&D campaigns never finish. They peter out and end at times that the players and the dungeon master did not expect, right? And that the vast majority of D&D campaigns never finish, right? And so Catherine's like, I read that article. I'm going to wait until this game craps out. Then I'm going to scoop up these players and to heck with April and Edith, right? Okay. All right, so that's the secret motivation of Catherine, right? So you have, and then let's talk about Deborah, okay? Deborah cares about one thing. Deborah wants to run a 20th level character, okay? Now, why does Deborah want to run a 20th level character? Well, the reason why is her brother did it, and actually her brother's much older, and came up in the in the 80s, right? Played in the 80s, right? And now she said, and he tells her about a character that he ran from first level all the way up to 20th level, and he's got literally dozens of stories from this campaign, right? And now Deborah doesn't realize that you really can't run a character from first to 20th level today. It's almost impossible, right? And the vast majority of players who started play after 2015 will never see a 20th level character. They'll never run a character from first to 20th level. But she wants to do this. This is her goal, right? But get this. She's already been in a campaign where she went from 1 to 4. She's been in a campaign where she went from 1 to 9. And she was in another campaign where she went from 1 to 7, right? But she's never made it to 20. But she has this desire to make it to 20th level. But she never tells anybody that she wants to run to 20th level because she knows that scares a lot of players. They're like, that's 2-3 years of play, right? And she knows if she speaks this secret desire, right, it'll actually lower the chances it'll happen. And it will, right? Like, because one, like, Catherine, who has a secret plan, she's hoping this game falls to pieces, right? And then last, Edith is actually one player, and I'm not gonna lie about it. There are players who are ready, open, have no secret hidden agendas, and they're ready to play. And everything that Edith says is going to be honest, true, and real, right? And she is going to openly communicate. The problem is all of her openness and her full, honest, raw, robust communication falls on dead ears, right? Because every other player at the table has a secret, hidden motivation, either hidden to the other players or hidden to themselves, right? Or hidden to both, right? And so So this is the issue is, and so how does the latte apocalypse come into this? Look around. If you don't see right now that there are, like, open communication is dead everywhere, right? Language is an absolute minefield, right? There are 50 sentences I could say right now that would end my life, right? I would lose everything. 50 sentences I could say this moment that would make sure that everything that I cared about, right? Provision, partnership, everything would be gone, would just disappear, right? Like, and we see it every day. There are stories of this person said this person has lost their ability to provide for themselves or for the ones they care about. This person is canceled. This person is socially out. And so, like, really right now, our entire world, everyone, right, is learning to close communication as quickly and carefully as possible, right? And to learn the new language, right? There are words and sentences that are verboten and at levels never before seen, right? Like, there used to be things you could say that all of society would repel, but those things are, like, they're shocking. The number of them are rising every day, and the ability to say something wrong, to utter a single sentence publicly and lose everything, rises every single day, right? So we are in a world where open communication is literally the last thing people are doing, right? And we are learning as a society to close communication and very, very, very carefully guard every single word we say, right? So the idea that our Dungeons and Dragons campaign should be based on a concept that is increasingly closing, right? Increasingly rare, increasingly non-existent, will absolutely turn to tears and flames, right? The other, and so that's the reason why I feel more than ever the latte apocalypse has made it absolutely clear that open communication, session zeros, don't be a doc. That's another one, right? People right now, don't be a doc. It sounds so simple, right? But the reality is people are under more stress than ever, right? And the odds that you're going to be a doc, that you, not other players, that you are going to be a doc at the table is very high at some point, right? And the reason why is you're under incredible stress, right? Look at the latte apocalypse, right? The LGBT community told us, right? They said, hey, this is my identity. When you say that my identity is not real, you deny my existence, right? I understand that. I understand that more today than I've ever understood that. Masks. It's stolen my identity. It's stolen my smile. It's stolen my ability to recognize sarcasm, to project sarcasm. I didn't do a lot of that. Well, maybe I did. I don't know. But to communicate openly, my identity is gone. It's wiped out. I don't exist publicly anymore, right? They don't see my expression. They don't see me. They don't hear me, right? The breath is stolen out of my lungs. Like, identity is gone, right? And so, we are in this situation where the pressures that are striking down on every human on the planet are immense. And the odds that you're not going to be a doc at the table are lower than ever, right? And so all of this stuff was nonsense before the latte apocalypse. Now it is just shockingly, clearly wrong, right? And so how do we deal with this, right? So one, we build systems that handle the issue that you will be a doc, right? 1 out of 10 games, 1 out of 50 games, right? And we build systems that allow people to recover from that, right? And also we build systems knowing that open communication is a thing that is happening less and less. And so rather than constantly tell people to do something they literally are learning not to do more every day, right? We give them tools to build a real good game in Dungeons and Dragons without open communication, right? and we look for patterns. Like here's a good one, right? They're like, oh, you want to know how your game's going? Ask your players, did they like the game? First of all, that is stupid, right? Like it is just so shockingly stupid, right? You're at the end of the game and you're like, hey, and April's like, Deborah and Catherine and Edith and Beth, did you have a good time? Right? First of all, who's gonna be like, no, that game sucked, right? Like nobody's gonna say that, right? Like it's just, and it's unless they're being a doc, right? Like they could think it, right? They're like, that's 4 hours of my life I'll never get back. But most players are never gonna say that, right? So how do you know if your players actually like your game? I've recently learned this, right? It's not because I asked my players, did you like the game? And then they're like, oh, yeah, I like the game. Oh, it's so just absurd that people think that's going to work. Like, just to ask a question and people are going to give you an honest, straight answer, right? Like, are people looking at the world around them? Like, the world is filled with untruths being spouted constantly at the highest levels of society, right? And they think that like truth is going to out at their D&D table, right? Like it's just so insane, right? It's bonkers nuts, right? And so basically, one of the ways I know, the most shocking thing that told me that my current Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game was working was when we were, going from week to week, and then one of the players was like, I can't play next week, I gotta work, right? And I was like, oh man, that's a bummer. Do you want us to switch the night, right? And the person was like, no, you know what? I'm going to schedule off. And there are multiple players scheduling off to get to my game, right? Like there's conversation about it at the table saying, and I'm like, it astounds me that there's like a drugstore 15 miles away from me, and this person is working a different schedule. And another person's life is affected by my D&D game because their schedule was changed, right? And I don't think my players are like, I'm playing D&D. Can you, like, they're just like, hey, I need to switch the shift, right? But, like, that is a true metric, right? That is, like, undeniably, people are going out of their way to make that game a priority in their life, right? That can't be faked. That can't be like, oh, yeah, I really like this game. Right? Like, that's real and raw and true, right? And that's the only way we get information today, right? Data points can be faked. Large, overarching patterns cannot, and they still exist, right? So that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thought. Do you still believe in Session Zero? I'd love to hear your defense after the Latte apocalypse has driven the nail into the heart of this vampire even further, how anyone could believe that Session Zeros are useful. And also, have you found some way to escape this open communication thing? Like, it's super clear to me that, like, every single day I need to pay attention to language, and there's a new list of things that are unsayable because they will end your life. Like, they will take your ability to provide for yourself. They will take everything. Like, and it will happen so fast, it will make your head spin. Right? Like, I'm on Twitter, right? And Twitter is just a cascade of, like, people saying the wrong sentence and they're done. They're finished, right? So, in a world like that, have you found some path to actually still openly communicate? I'd love to hear it, because that is what would be necessary for Session Zero to actually work. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.